Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Over the last few days I've been able to get in my first ever game of Warhammer The Old World. Really interesting experience, and I was playing against Paul from the Epic Flail channel, details of which are in the description down below. And this really marks the first step on my journey towards preparing for an event in Lansing. Again, organises YouTube channel in the description down below. Do feel free to check them out. Now, this game was very much a learning experience, not really got pictures from the game itself. There's a lot of unpainted plastic flying around. It was played at 1300 points. Wasn't a massively serious game because we were just trying to test rules out, see what happened in certain circumstances, things like that. So by no means going for optimum game moves. But having pushed some plastic around, there were three things I think that really struck me as points of note going forward, and which will definitely have an impact on how I'm considering the game going forward. It really challenged my preconceptions around how the game would play. So what are these three things? Well, the first of them is lethality. I remember the days of 8th edition. I mean, it's been nearly 9 years since I've played a game of Warhammer. So my recollection is very much coloured by those experiences. 8th edition probably being the game I played most of all of the editions of Warhammer, certainly at any kind of serious level. And the lethality of 8th edition just is not replicated. I kind of knew that going into the game, but I don't think I'd really come to terms with the fact that you just don't take off anything like as many models as you used to in a typical round, and that affects formations, it affects army builds, the whole works. Whereas I had an expectation almost that if a cavalry charge came crashing into my ranks, it was Bretonnians against my dwarves, I was going to be picking up at least one rank, possibly more, of troops. And that simply didn't happen. Yes, my front rank was virtually always wiped out if I got a cavalry charge against it, but I'd always get a couple of attacks back. And that definitely surprised me. And having spoken to other clubmates and seen what their thoughts were in sort of the club discords and other community discords and the like, it does seem to be a fairly consistent experience that lethality rate is reduced. Stuff just doesn't die as much, which means the game style does change. So chipping away and breaking people on psychology looks like it's going to become more important than just simply battering people into the ground in a single round of combat. Let's move on to the second point of note, which is precision. So Warhammer, again, has always been a game of precision. Movement, where you end up, is really important, so you don't get slowed down by terrain, etc., or units getting in each other's way. And although I knew that in my head, coming face to face with it, having not played a game like Warhammer for so many years now, it took me a little bit by surprise, actually, and I think it will take a little bit of getting used to. I'm more used to games like Warhammer 40,000, which, while precision, again, where you're putting stuff, is important for line of sight and the like, I think movement's generally a little bit easier, being able to shoot at stuff generally that little bit easier. You're not having to be as precise, because if you get something slightly wrong, suddenly you can't charge, or you've got a unit blocked in and it can't get where it needs to be in future turns, things like that. So definitely something to watch out for and to keep an eye on formations. Going into the game, I'd got very much an idea that the game seemed to want to be played in a defending in depth kind of way. And I think that's still valid, but you need to be really careful on how you deploy and how you move stuff to keep those channels open, particularly if you're going for any wider formations to maximize the number of attacks in the fighting rank. And that takes me then to point number 3, which is synergy. One of the things we found in our game was units left to their own devices, be it heavy cavalry, be it infantry, whatever, war machines, if they weren't supported by anything or a character or magic items or whatever it may be, they struggled to get real value. Particularly, I think the Bretonians found this, where without some assistance, there was no magicians on the board, for example, they really struggled to really do enough damage to put anything they charged onto the back foot. And likewise, the dwarves weren't really killing much, weren't taking much off the board. In combats, they took an awful lot of time with a lot of backwards and forwards, with no one really being able to seize a big enough advantage. Now, admittedly, both of us were rolling like absolute chumps. It's not an excuse at all as to who won, who lost, or anything like that. We didn't even count the victory points. As I say, it was very much a test game, but we both had an awful lot of experiences where you roll 6 dice needing a 3 up and you get 4 2s and a 1. That lack of re-rolls, which is so prevalent in games like Warhammer 40,000, is really missed. So having some kind of synergy, any kind of way of eking out a bit of an advantage, I think is going to be really important, particularly on your core line troops. And really, I think actually even shock troops as well, where it's important that they make the breakthrough and make it quickly. They're going to need some support, and you can't just rely on their natural prowess. And I think what feeds into this, and it sort of connects back to the lethality issue as well, is whilst armour saves, particularly of cavalry, aren't as good as they used to be, because being mounted no longer gives you that +1 to your armour save, there's actually a lot less armour penetration floating around as well. I really felt that with crossbows, for example, where I was used to the concept that crossbows gave a -1 armour save. They still do, but only if you roll a 6 to wound. Their effectiveness, it just felt an awful lot weaker than they used to be, particularly as tending to be firing at longer range. It's difficult to hit. Things that get through bouncing off armour is not a good look. So you need something to help them out. Or you need to recognise that actually your crossbows are the synergistic thing, and it's just nibbling a couple of things away so that something else can get that job done. So overall, I would say it's an interesting game. It plays very differently to how I expected it to play, and where I kind of had the right idea, it was more heavily invested down those routes than perhaps I'd expected. So a bit of an eye-opener. I'm really looking forward to getting a few more games under my belt and really trying to get to grips with the rule set, whilst trying to banish those half-remembered recollections of previous editions from my brain so that they don't cause confusion. So how are your initial forays into the game now that hopefully most of us are up and running to some extent? Do let me know down in the comments below. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.